to thank Isabel Stafford for coming to us for the second time this year. She did present this exact workshop in the fall, and it was very successful. Our students had a lot of pointers out of it. And I always tell my colleague Audra Bonney, who's also here with me, I always tell her that it's very interesting because people used to listen to me more when I came to Bentley as a recruiter. And I was volunteering my time and I was working with Audra's students and everyone would listen to me. And now we are actually bringing in people like Isabel to teach about salary negotiations, how things have changed since I was a recruiter, and all the things that you should and shouldn't do when you're going through the process. So I'm going to let Isabel introduce herself and start her presentation. And I'm hoping to, Isabel, I don't know whether you want to answer questions while things are happening, or should we hold off questions until the end?
I think I will suggest I'll stop every couple of slides to address kind of real-time questions and then give people more of a general opportunity at the end of the presentation, if that works.
Great, awesome, thank you.
Lovely. So
you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Lucy. So I'm just going to share my screen. Can I just check that everyone can see my presentation and that's pulling through? See a nod from Jen. Thank you, Jen. So first of all, thank you very much for having me back. My name is Isabel Stafford. I am a senior global recruiter at TripAdvisor. I've been with the TripAdvisor business for 5 and a bit years in 2 spats. I actually was with the business for about 3 years and then I left for a period of 18 months and then I came back, and I've come back about 2 years ago now. So know the business pretty well, have been through quite a lot with the business in that time. And hopefully I will be able to give you guys a good understanding from a recruiter standpoint what we look for when negotiating around salary and just having general conversations around salary, because I know it is a bit of an unknown area, especially if you're new to the job market or if perhaps you've been out of the job market for a little while. It can be quite a daunting topic to discuss. But just wanted to say, obviously, I will try and get to as many questions in today. I am happy for you to email me. If you're just emailing to say hi, I would prefer it if you sent me a LinkedIn message just as a kind of let's get connected. But if you have a specific question, I have given my email. It's istafford@tripadvisor.com, or do feel free to add me on LinkedIn and we can have more of an offline conversation. If you don't feel comfortable addressing a question in the group, that is also fine. So today's agenda, I'm going to try and get to as much as possible. I think this is pretty comprehensive from kind of feedback we had last time around, but want to cover off Massachusetts salary law, things that are bespoke to the local area and also just in general the US, go around the do's and don'ts, because there certainly are some things that we as recruiters can't ask you, and wanted to highlight that here in case you are in conversations with recruiters now to know what they can be approaching you about with regards to salary. We will also talk about the way in which a recruiter is judging the salary, i.e. how we determine what a salary should be. Talk about how to phrase your salary expectations if you're unsure. Understanding the full compensation package, so not just the salary itself, but if there's a bonus, if there's benefits that could enhance the package as a whole. Understand your future career progression within a business as well, i.e. is this a role that can just address your immediate need, or is there a clear path for progression internally at the point of joining in the next kind of 1 to 3 years in role. How to respond to an offer, that's something that is really important, and I'm going to be having the help of Jen later in the presentation to do a couple of role play scenarios about a positive way to respond to an offer and an area that perhaps you should avoid in terms of addressing an offer. Negotiation once you've received the initial offer, How to navigate a counteroffer, that's something that can be sometimes really beneficial, but also sometimes quite confusing. Again, if you've been out of the job market for a little while, it seems to be an area that perhaps people get a bit nervous about because they're not sure how to communicate a counteroffer and what that might look like. Useful resources that you as a group can utilise in supporting you in your job search, but also understanding the offering of the market from a compensation perspective. Navigating right to work questions, that's really important if you are an international student and perhaps you are here on a study visa or you're looking to go to a different location for your place of work. And then Jen and I are going to do a couple of role plays, as I mentioned, and then we'll close things out with Q&A. So again, if you feel confident bringing your questions to the group, you can utilise the chat function in the Zoom meeting, or feel free to unmute when we get to that time and just ask questions. Happy to kind of address those as we go. If not, like I said, feel free to reach out to me directly. I don't mind at all. I appreciate that if it's something specific, you might want to keep it private. So diving in, so I wanted to talk about Massachusetts, specifically salary laws and what that looks like, because there are some bespoke ones to Massachusetts. The most significant being in the Act of 2016 in Chapter 177, they established a pay equity clause in which you basically can't ask for salary information predating the conversation that you're having with a recruiter. This came effective in July 2018 and greatly changed the way in which we had to ask about salary expectations as recruiters. In terms of what the bill covers, it covers all prospective employees applying or being considered for employment in Massachusetts, all employers in Massachusetts, including both private and public employers, which again is something that changed as part of the Act. There used to be separate laws for both private and public companies. There was differentiation between the two. That is no longer the case. And it covers us not being able to ask about current, past salaries, benefits, or any other compensation. So not just your actual salary, but any other compensation that you might be granted as part of a current or previous role. What it does not cover, and what we can talk about as part of the recruiting process, is if you're being considered internally for a promotion, i.e. you are with, for instance, TripAdvisor, in my instance, if you are employed by us, we will have access to your current salary, your current bonus, and any other compensation, and that will be factored in when you're being considered for an internal role. And that is well within the bounds of what is allowed. Salary history that a candidate discloses. So if you tell a recruiter, I am currently making X amounts, and they haven't prompted you for it, i.e. they've asked you, what are your expectations, and you volunteer that information, that is not covered by that law because you have given that information voluntarily. And salary history that is obtained from other sources other than previous employers, i.e. if you've published anything about your current salaries, or they've looked for a benchmark on things like Glassdoor where people have referred to their role title and their previous salary, it sometimes gives us an indication, and those things are not covered. For more information, you can go to mass.gov for further info about this particular Act of 2016. It is very easy to look up. I actually, when I was doing some research and prep for this, just Googled it to get further insight into what was covered within it. It's very easy to navigate, and mass.gov is a great resource if you're not sure on anything. So salary laws, do's and don'ts. So this is just reiterating some of the things I've already mentioned. So what we cannot ask you as a recruiter approaching you as a candidate is details regarding salary history. If your current employer is paying you salary plus other things, we can't ask about those additional benefits either. So what your benefit package looks like as a whole. And we can't prompt you or provide you with leading questions. We have to be very careful about how we approach the topic of salary. And I'll show you a little bit more and give more insight into how later in the presentation. We cannot approach your current or previous employer to obtain information about your salary history. And we definitely cannot screen a candidate based on their expectations, i.e. apply a maximum or minimum prior salary as a requirement. What we can do is have a conversation with you either within the initial stages or as part of kind of the initial outreach to understand what your expectations are. And sometimes it's a case of the recruiter might give you a range and say, is this in line with your expectations? If you then remove your process as a result because it's not in line with your expectations, that is allowed, just to be clear. What a recruiter can and most likely will ask, we will definitely ask what your expectations are or what you're looking for in terms of salary. So this doesn't refer at all to your current salary. It's purely about your future salary prospect and what you would consider as part of that salary range. If you have another offer, your recruiter is likely to ask the total value of that offer to understand if what we can offer is competitive. And that again is well within the realms of what is okay. We can ask you for salary history post an offer being made. And when I say an offer being made, i.e. you have had your offer letter or some form of documentation and signed it to say that you're in agreement and accepting the offer. At that point, we could ask you for salary history information. Frankly, we probably won't. It's not something that's best practice. It's frankly not really any of our business when we've agreed with new employment, but some companies do ask for it. And I know this because one of my candidates last week actually explained a little bit about experience recently. Oh, let me just admit, Sean. Okay. We can also conduct background checks, information other than salary history. For example, information about the role you held in pre-employments and what that looked like. And that could be contingent upon your employment with a business. So when I say that, for instance, if you have been misleading in the information you have provided, i.e. you have given the wrong job titles or wrong dates of employment, that could be contingent upon your ability to join the company. And finally, we can conduct our own research around salary history from public sources like Glassdoor, like LinkedIn, to understand what the salary ranges from a company might look like, to get an understanding of whether you would be in line with what we are able to offer. I am going to pause very quickly because this is a lot of really good and really important information. Do we have any questions in the chat right now? I'm not sure how I view the chats.
Isabel, there was one question with regards to the ability for the PowerPoints to be, can they have the PowerPoints is the question.
Yes, you can have the PowerPoints. I will send them. What I will do is I will send them to Lucy, and Lucy can then distribute to anyone who signed up for this webinar. So yes, absolutely, you may have the PowerPoint. There's nothing in here that's confidential or would be contingent that I can't share. So yes, absolutely, I will share that.
And just to clarify as well, for students who know that we do have a YouTube channel, and this session is being recorded and will be available after the session.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Audra. Appreciate that. Lovely. So moving on. Oh, my computer catches up. So first of all, in terms of when we are addressing the question around salary, as a recruiter, we will have a target figure we are generally working to. That target figure is usually referred to as the benchmark. Most companies refer to it as that, or they have a target salary. Those are the two terms they might use for that. In terms of how that benchmark is created, it's usually created by looking at your internal resource pool, i.e. if you have other members of staff in the role you are recruiting within the same function, and also looking at the external market. We're quite lucky at TripAdvisor. We have a network of over 2,000 other businesses in the local area that we benchmark against, and we look at what they're paying their current employees to get an understanding of whether we're being competitive in market. And we thankfully usually are on the upper segment of the competitive rate against market, and that is largely where we would be sitting. But you might hear a recruiter refer to the term target figure or benchmark, and that is what they're usually basing that on. And usually there are compensation teams internally within the talent or HR world who would support that and provide that to the recruiter. So that is what we're referring to. Peter wakes up. So your salary expectations. So I always recommend that going into any recruiting process, you have a figure in mind. If you are not sure, there are some really great resources that frankly you can access very quickly and easily at your disposal to support understanding what your target figure should be. You can look at job board providers for that information. Glassdoor, LinkedIn, or even your internal resource at Bentley would be a really good point of reference. If you're not sure, you can also rely upon your colleagues and classmates as a really good resource also. I sometimes utilise the people around me in my network when I've been talking about salaries to understand whether we are actually being competitive, and you can do the same as an external candidate. You can utilise these. The one thing I'm just going to highlight here, job boards, Glassdoor and LinkedIn in particular, might have quite a large range because again, they do a similar thing. They benchmark against similar roles in the area with a similar job title. So sometimes the ranges can be quite broad, even up to 30% range on the actual salary itself. So they aren't particularly accurate in some instances, but some instances they can be very accurate, especially in Glassdoor. Sometimes if you Google Glassdoor and then go in and search a job title, it will give you all the local companies that have that similar job title. And sometimes people do share what their salary, their specific salary is, or what their range is. And that can be a really good resource when thinking about what your target figure should be. So how do you respond to the question around what your expectations are? So a few things to keep in mind, and this is just recommendation based upon what I see as a recruiter. Be direct about what you want. It's very confusing as a recruiter if someone you're interviewing doesn't have a figure in mind. It can be quite disconcerting because then you're unsure as to whether you can meet their expectations. But one thing that I find, if people don't have a figure in mind, they often will turn the question to me and say, well, what is the range available? And that's sometimes really helpful. But just to be clear, it's really good to go into an interview knowing roughly what your expectations are, so we can at least refer to either a specific figure that you're targeting yourself on, or a range, or like I said, if you're not comfortable, then turn the question back to them. But we will have a figure that we are looking for, and that is usually base salary. Often people will have broader packages. Packages as a whole can vary greatly. So I'm usually asking when I speak to candidates about what their expectation is in terms of minimum requirements around salary. And people usually are able to get a good indication. And just to be clear, we usually work on an annual basis. So it's good to know both the annual and monthly, depending the country you are interviewing in. For US, it's largely annual salary. But if you're looking at Europe or APAC, sometimes they look for the monthly figure. And as a one step further, if you can do it, gross and net expectations are also really good. I find, and the reason I mention this is I recruit for Portugal an awful lot. I have a Lisbon office there. They're a great team, but in Lisbon, they get paid 14 times a year, which is a very bizarre figure. It's not bi-weekly, it's monthly, but they get 2 extra payments at mid-year and end of year, and they always work on a net basis. So I have to do a conversion going into any conversation for any role there. I have to have the gross annual, the net annual, the gross figure on a 14-month year, and a net figure on a 14-month year. So understanding the way in which people are discussing salary also is really important. But like I said, that's a niche example. But if you are someone who would like to look at international opportunities, that's just something to be conscious of also. But the ideal way to phrase your response when responding to the question of what are your current salary expectations is around something. I am very excited about this opportunity and open to negotiation. However, my salary expectations would be in the range of X to X plus all the standard company benefits. Just so you're rounding it off nicely, you're setting an expectation, this is what I'm looking for, and then it kind of opens the floor for the recruiter to say, yes, that is within what we can offer you, or actually, unfortunately, this role is paying a little bit less, and would you consider X, Y, and Z, considering all factors? Just going to pause again for questions, because I know that that is a big question, and I'm sure a lot of you will be thinking about that in the conversations you're having right now. Audra, are there any questions in the chat function regarding any of that, please?
So far, we're still waiting, but I had a question in terms of the timing from a recruiter's perspective. When does that question come about? It can come in right in the beginning, it can come in the middle during the interview. What do you do, Isabel?
So I always do it at the end of the call, because frankly, I would like to get to know the person before I put them on the spot. I think it's a nicer way to do it. And I know that speaking to my colleagues at TripAdvisor, unless we have an upfront concern, i.e. this person looks much more senior than the role, or they look like they have a greater number of years of experience and therefore their expectations might be a blocker, we wouldn't ask it until the end. But if, for instance, we're running into those kind of more niche situations where perhaps someone's applied for a role that only requires 3 years experience, they have 8 years experience in markets, we may then start the conversation by saying, can I ask what your expectations are? Because I'm concerned we might not be able to meet your expectations. And that is also fine. But for the vast majority, I personally like to talk to someone about the role, explain where it fits in the business, get to know them, get to know what they're looking for. Because as part of that conversation, you might actually determine that they're not interested in the role because it's not what they're looking for, or perhaps the role isn't quite what they expected, and they might say, actually, this isn't really in line with my expectations. And then it avoids the conversation for them, because sometimes, in most instances, people aren't particularly comfortable talking about the salary. So I'd rather do it at the very end when we've established, yes, we're both on the same page, yes, we'd like to consider you for this role, and then address it.
That seems ideal, Isabel. And we do have one question from Adam Thomas Frost. Adam, do you want to unmute and ask your question yourself?
Hi, sure. I was just curious about FLSA exempt status, as to whether that was negotiable or whether that was just at the discretion of the employer hiring.
Sorry, what is LFSA? I've never heard of it.
It basically exempts overtime pay for the employee.
Oh, so exempts and non-exempt splits.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So the way in which a lot of companies now deal with that is they usually have roles banded, and it's usually at a certain level a role becomes exempt, and it's usually when it gets to a higher level in pay brackets. So for instance, at TripAdvisor, for example, we have categorization of our roles into levels and bandings, and up to a certain level, they are non-exempt and get an hourly rate that equates to an overall yearly salary. And we will know both the hourly rates of a role and what it's paying, and then that equates and what that equates to on an annual basis. And then at a certain level, it will become exempt and won't be eligible for overtime pay. But that's something that we have at our disposal and usually share. And I actually usually tell my US candidates if it is a non-exempt role or an exempt role, just so they understand whether overtime is something that is possible.
Okay, thank you.
You're very welcome.
And Isabel, there is just one more question here. It should be a quick one. So what is the standard range size?
So the is usually 10%. In full transparency. So we usually have, well, sorry, it's technically, it's 10% either side of the benchmark is usually what most companies work to. I've worked for 3 companies in my career thus far, and they've all had that range of 10% either side of the target figure. It seems to be quite industry standard. I have a number of friends and also colleagues who have moved on from TripAdvisor who I stay in touch with, and that seems to be about right. Sometimes it's larger if it's a more junior role is the only difference I see on that. So for instance, if it's kind of a graduate role, they might have more of a range because they might be open to someone with less applied experience, i.e. they've not worked thus far, but would then be able to upskill them and offer them progression over a set period. So they might say the starting role might be offering less, but within the 12 to 18 month period, you'd be expected to be promoted to the next band of that kind, for instance, and then it might offer an incremental increase over the years. That's the only time where the band is usually more than the 10% flex either side. Wonderful. Any other questions?
I think we're good right now.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Audra. Okay, so understanding the full compensation package. The one thing I always say to people very, very openly is your base salary pays your bills and puts food on your table. So know what that needs to be for you personally, whatever your situation is, know what that figure is. Everything else is very nice to have and is always appreciated, but usually isn't guaranteed. So just be mindful of that. For instance, bonuses are usually based on performance, both for either yourself as an individual or yourself and company, or in certain instances, just company performance. So just be aware that it's not a guarantee. Similar with stocks and shares. Usually companies might grant you stocks and shares that vest over a certain period. It's obviously dependent on the stock market, where they vest and how high/high low those might be at the time at which they vest. Obviously, you don't have to vest your stock at any time. It's usually a case of once they have vested, you can choose to leave them where they are or go ahead and get them vested. But just be mindful of that. And then company benefits. Obviously, company benefits are really important, particularly in the US, where you don't have a national health service and you ideally would probably want medical insurance. So always inquire for the list of benefits. If you are receiving an offer, it is totally okay to ask for more information around the company benefits before you make a decision. And also having the full details in writing is always a recommendation on my part. I was actually told recently by one of your students that she didn't receive her offer in writing, which I was quite surprised about because that is usually standard practice. So just feel free to reach out to your recruiter upon receiving an offer and saying, can I have the details in writing so I can fully consider all aspects? Because it's really important that you have clarity on what each independent benefit offers you and how that might impact obviously your cost of living. So career path and progression opportunities. This is something I feel quite passionate about and talk a lot about because I have been fortunate enough to see a number of the people I've placed over the years progress in the business advisor. And I think it's really good to understand, especially if you are new to the job market or you're someone who has taken a career change and is coming back to full-time employment, or perhaps have just taken a break from employment and are looking to come back. It's good to understand what the opportunities beyond the actual job that is on offer looks like. So i.e., think about things like how performance is reviewed and managed, and internal growth that results off of positive performance in role, and also understanding the actual cases where progression has happened. So one thing that my managers do, particularly in an area like software engineering, where it's a very competitive market, there are a number of companies that we're always competing against when we're offering roles. We like to give real life examples or have them connect with individuals who have progressed depending upon their level, so they understand what their steps might look like, not just in the interim, but also in the future within the business. So feel free to ask the team, for instance, when you are interviewing with individual team members, what their experience has been within the company and what the timelines were like. Obviously, be mindful, each individual is completely different and has to be dealt in a separate way, but it's good to understand when it's happened, how frequently it happens, and if there is a kind of mapped progression for the role. For instance, if you are coming into an analytics role, if from an analyst you would expect to go into a senior analyst role or a lead analyst role, and what the change in responsibilities might look like and the opportunities would be in terms of Is the team a growing team? Is it a static team? What does that look like for the individuals who are at that more senior level looking for their next steps? And hiring managers usually are happy to be transparent about this. For instance, I am recruiting for a role right now where the manager has shared with me that one of their team members are ready to take the next step in their career. Therefore, it's unlikely we'll be able to progress this new role coming in for the next 18 to 24 months, just based on the average growth of the team. And I'm being very transparent when I speak to people about that. But frankly, 18 to 24 months for me isn't unrealistic in terms of people's time in role. Most companies will have a minimum tenure in role before you're actually able to be promoted or progress internally anyway. And you're more than welcome to ask your recruiter or the hiring teams about that, because they will be able to share more specific company information also. So how to react to an offer? So just some best practice, just kind of thinking about your relationship with your recruiter and how you respond to the business when you've been given an offer. So just to remember a few things as best practice. One, your recruiter will be very excited to share the details of an offer with you. We're usually very invested. We've worked hard to get a pipeline of candidates to the team, then get the team to meet with who we feel are the best candidates for the role. And then the team become invested once they started to engage with candidates. And they're usually thinking about how people will build into their team. So always start by firstly thanking your recruiter for the offer, and by extension, not just them, but the business. It's always good to just remember your manners in that respect and just consider the amount of work that goes in on the business side when providing someone with an offer. Ask to see the details of the offer in writing. As I mentioned, it's good to have it actually all out in front of you so you can make a very considered decision. You will also usually be expected to take some time to review the offer. Standard practice is 24 to 48 hours usually for people to think things over, absorb the information, consider their options. If you're not sure, or if you would like to bounce ideas off someone, would highly recommend speaking with your GCD coach at Bentley or discussing your offer with friends or family. Sometimes it's really good to talk about your options and just get your peers' advice and thoughts around things. If you're waiting for another offer from a different company, feel free to reach out to that business. Let them know, I've now got an offer. What is the timeline before you will be making a decision? And also it gives that company the opportunity to say, okay, this candidate, we really like them. I can see the team were really invested and really positive in their feedback. They now have an offer. We need to move quicker. Because sometimes it is a case of they might be considering all candidates in play and they were waiting to make a decision until they'd seen everyone. But obviously if someone gets an offer, that sometimes changes things and prompts the business that you're waiting on to become more fast-paced in their approach. Also, I highly recommend just taking some time to reflect on the offer, whether it meets expectations or perhaps it doesn't. Take a little bit of time to think things through. And if for any reason it does not meet your expectations, think about the way in which you would like to negotiate on the offer, i.e., is the base salary below your expectations? Is it a case of actually you weren't expecting the bonus to be structured the way it was and you have some questions, or you might need to negotiate on the base to compensate for the change in the bonus that you weren't anticipating? So try and consider all factors. Audra, I think I just saw a little flashing notification. Do we have some questions?
Going to say at this point, we are still waiting for additional questions to be asked.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Lovely. So negotiating on an offer. So first of all, during the initial conversations, wait to be asked about your salary. Most recruiters might volunteer some information about the salary, particularly with roles that they recruit for frequently and we have quite a fixed rate. We might want to share the actual range available as opposed to asking you. So just be conscious of letting them lead the conversation and prompt that aspect of the conversation. If the question of salary makes you nervous or uncomfortable, because it does some people, I know that I've been in the candidate chair a few times and I don't even like approaching the question of salary, especially if I don't know the industry I'm interviewing with, or I don't know the company particularly well. It's sometimes easier to ask for the range available, or say, I can see that based on your previous employees or based upon some research I've done, that the offer will be probably ranging between X and X amount. Is that aligned to the offering for this role? And refer to what the information you have available. If for any reason you think the salary isn't fair or should be higher, then use your knowledge of the market. And that's why I always recommend doing some prep before you go into those initial conversations. The topic is going to come up, be prepared for it, and have some market insight to reflect on and say, actually, that is significantly lower than what I've seen in the market. What is the rationale or reason for that? If you're unsure, just be honest about what you need/want. Most recruiters will be very transparent. We're happy to talk about it. We're also very well aware that this is a sensitive topic, and we're happy to have a broader conversation around that and talk things through with a candidate, particularly in those initial stages, because frankly, we want to ensure that before putting you through, usually quite an extensive interview process, that we're going to be able to offer you something that is competitive at the end of that. And then upon receiving the offer, take some time to review all details, so the basic, the bonus, any additional benefits. And again, please ask for in writing so you can consider all aspects. So how to navigate a counteroffer? Lucy, did you?
Oh, I'm sorry. There are a few questions. Do you want to wait until?
Yeah, no, let's do all the questions now. I'd rather address them while they're fresh in people's mind.
Okay, Chris Walker, would you like to turn your mic on and ask your question?
Sure. So hi, how are you? So my question is, I'm kind of in a situation, it really does apply to me. I'm in a situation where I'm already employed. I'm about to receive my CPA license once I finish my MBA. And at that point in time, it's expected that I will be receiving a promotion for manager. But there has, we're in the middle of tax season right now, and it's really not the time to like go into the boss's office and start negotiating my salary. So, and what has typically been done in the past is people will receive a letter in writing saying that they received a promotion and here's what your compensation is. What happens at that point if, let's say, I'm not satisfied with the salary that is on the the compensation package? Where do I go from there in regards to negotiating my salary?
So if it's an internal thing, and we've seen this quite a lot, if it's internal, I would highly recommend talking directly to your manager about the overarching package and understand what the rationale for the figure provided is. Because it may be that they have some internal knowledge, i.e. maybe it's a case of there isn't budget at that time, or perhaps they're going through a promotional cycle later in the year that you will fall into. So approach your manager as a first step to understand the figure on offer and why it was the figure it is. And then beyond that, if they can't give you further insight, address it with your local HR team. So obviously, it's not something that would go typically through the recruiter. It's more about your HR team, and they deal with usually existing employees. But we had a very recent scenario of this case where we had someone in finance. They became ACCA, which is the leading accounting body in the United Kingdom. They became qualified, and we offered them an enhancement on their salary as a result of them becoming qualified, but it wasn't a promotion, and they were surprised that they weren't getting promoted. So we had to address as to why, and it was due to them falling into the mid-year promotional cycle. So we increased their salary partially because we had them earmarked to be promoted mid-year. So it was kind of part of a broader workings, but it wasn't until they asked those questions to understand the rationale that they got the context. So just be aware that your manager might not have all the context, or if they haven't got the ability to share the full details because it might be still going through approvals or something of that kind. So approach your manager in the first instance to discuss it. And then beyond that, if they can't give you more insight or rationale, or if you're still not happy, then approach your HR BP and they'll be able to give you more context, or if it's a case of there simply isn't budget, then that is obviously a broader topic then, Chris, because actually then it's a case of, do you want to stay within the business, or would you like to go elsewhere in order to explore your options that might be more beneficial to you from a compensation perspective?
Thank you.
No problem at all.
Next question is from Liza. If you want to turn on your mic.
Hi, yes. So I was wondering, what is the best way to contact someone about negotiating an offer, whether I should give them a call or sending an email back is okay?
So Lisa, first of all, you can do either, whichever you feel most comfortable with. My candidates, I usually set an expectation of, I'll call you back in X amount of time. Is that okay? And we usually agree it. So they're expecting a call from me. So I then give them the opportunity to ask questions. If they want to negotiate, they can do that. So a lot of people will set the expectation, but it is okay to reach out to them on email and say, would you mind giving me a call? And then you kind of turn it over to them, and it makes it a bit easier for them, of they can then call you when it's convenient or when they have a gap, because sometimes it's a case of their diary might be stacked and they might not have a set period in order to set up a meeting. And it may just be a case of they've got 10 minutes, they'll call you as soon as they're available. But also feel free to call your recruiter. I would hope that for an interview process, they would take the time to get to know you a little bit and build that relationship. So utilize that relationship when it comes to the offer negotiation.
Can I ask a quick follow-up question? I think I'm just worried that if I do receive an offer, I have to give my answer right away, because I'm worried that if I don't reply like 1 to 2 business days, they will give another offer to someone else. So I guess I'm like, I don't want to take like the extra step and like ask for a phone call in a week, and then when we call, it's like they're already looking at a better candidate. So would you say that's an issue, or no?
So I would say if they've presented you with an offer, they're fairly invested by that point. And just be aware that if they've presented you an offer, usually there's a whole process we have to go from the back end. Usually it involves approvals, talking to the leadership team. It's quite a big lift for us to do an offer. So at that point, we're usually quite invested. We usually want to see that offer through. In terms of asking for time, can I ask, are you concerned because you might have other things in play that you're wanting to consider that might take you that little bit longer? Would that be the rationale as to why you wouldn't be able to get back straight away?
I meant on their side that they might get back to me with a phone call.
Okay,
like quickly.
so I mean, people will usually prioritize offers. I usually, for instance, my working day might be busy, but I had an offer last week and I knew I was completely stacked throughout my working day. And I sent my candidate a message and said, hey, I don't have time in my working day today. Can I call you this evening? And he said, yeah, that's great. No problem at all. What time's good? And then I arranged a time and said, is this time okay? And I called him back. Frankly, if it's an offer, it's important to us, and we usually want to spend the time. So don't be concerned about that. I would more say that if, for instance, there's something that's preventing you from responding to the offer, set expectations, i.e. if you're waiting on another offer, or perhaps you have a couple of offers and you want to consider all the offers together, that is fine, but tell your recruiter to say, look, I've got a couple of offers, or I'm expecting to hear back from another role in the next 3 days. Can I come back to you once I've heard back from them so I can think about my options? The best policy, in all honesty, is just be very transparent so everyone's expectations are aligned. It's only frustrating if, for instance, we extend an offer, we don't hear anything, and then it's a case of, why have we not heard anything? Is the candidate disengaged? Do they not like the offer? Are they not interested in the company anymore? So just be very open and honest about anything that might keep you in terms of timeline, but don't be concerned about the recruiter. They will make time if it's important, which it will be because it's an offer. They will make the time to call you.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, Isabel.
You're very welcome.
Isabel, there's a few more questions. A couple of them are fairly detailed, I think. Would you like to address them now or later?
I can address them now, or
Okay.
we could finish up and then I could circle back to them. I don't mind either way. If they're regarding the offer negotiation, I think it's fine to take them now just while they're fresh in people's minds.
Okay, awesome. Rebecca, you want to turn on your mic and ask your question?
Sure. Hi. Sorry if you already answered this question. I was having some internet problems, so I was 15 minutes late. But I was curious if you recommend using tools like Glassdoor to get a better sense of salary ranges before any negotiations happen.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is something that is kind of alluded to in the early part of the presentation, but just be mindful with Glassdoor, LinkedIn, they usually are looking at a huge spread of data. So the salaries might be quite broad in terms of the ranges. So just be mindful of that. But you can definitely use them to get an indication of what a company or what a role within a company might be paying as kind of a starting point, but just be a little bit flexible around that figure, because understand that, for instance, if it's a business analyst role in the greater Boston area, it might say the range is between $70,000 and $100,000 a year, and that's a very big range. So it's going to vary depending upon the industry, depending upon the company size, depending upon the role and years of experience associated with that role. So just be mindful of like broad spectrum job titles and the amount of nuances to company that might come into play as part of that, but absolutely use it as a starting point, and then just kind of think about the things that are important to you as an individual and the things that you need to be mindful of from a kind of cost of living, your expenses, etc.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Aidan Redmond.
Sorry. Hi, thank you. So I was just curious, since the recruiters are working with a budget, is their goal and focus really to identify the best possible candidate at the best possible price?
So it's not about the best possible price. It's more a case of, for instance, roles will be banded to a degree. So for instance, we might not be able to afford someone with 10 years experience for a role that's needing or requiring 3 years experience because of their salary expectations. It's not that common where I've been faced with a situation of I'm looking at a candidate on paper and I'm saying this candidate meets the requirements of the job and they're well outside of what we have benchmarked. Because like I said, we do look at the broader industry standard by benchmarking against a number of different companies and our internal teams. So it's unlikely that we would be not able to meet them within that 10% flex either side of the benchmark. It's only happened to me a very small handful of times in my whole career at TripAdvisor, and I've been negotiating roles for at least 5 years now. So yeah, I wouldn't say it's about that, but also benchmarks are there for a reason. It is a suggestion. We have also been in a circumstance where we've had amazing candidates who are the top of the benchmark, and actually a team member's gone, okay, this person really proves themselves through the interview process. What can we do to enhance the package for them? And then there's other things like spot bonus or sign-on bonus that could be offered to compensate if they are that higher end also. So there are a lot of things businesses can and will try and think about if the candidate is right for the role and they show their skill to be obviously valuable through the interviewing process.
Ellie, I guess this answered your question. It's a similar question. Ellie Hugh?
Yeah, thank you. Like it covered like half of it, but still I want to know like besides the money part, what are the other incentives for like HR's KPIs and still like the reason I want to know that is because I want to know if there's a strategy for me to negotiate for a better salary for myself.
So, and are you asking about other things that might be available? Because that definitely depends upon the company as to what that might look like. But are you referring to a circumstance that you're in right now? Are you negotiating an offer, Ellie? Do you have a concern that perhaps you're...
No, I'm still too early for that. I'm just I just think this workshop is very useful. Everyone are going to use it like whenever you land a job.
Yeah. So like I said, it's about what you want from a role. I would just be mindful that obviously going into a negotiation and asking for something that's unrealistic can also be a negative process for us. So just be mindful of understanding what's available in those initial stages and bearing that in mind through the interview.
Sorry, let me rephrase. I'm not asking for like in a realistic thing. For me, based on my understanding, is that as if I am HR, I have a range for this kind of person, for this kind of candidate. But for the candidate, he or she always want to like land in a higher rank. But if what are the reasons that you are very willing to give him or has like the best
so
higher
the higher range? Is that what you were asking, Ellie? Why would you utilize that higher part of the range?
Yes.
So I only utilize the higher part of the range if candidates display very good skill set within the interview. I've also been in the situation where I have been in a circumstance where a candidate is asking for something that is very high and they don't do particularly well through the interview, but we see a lot of potential. And I've had to go back to them and say, look, you didn't perform particularly well, therefore the team aren't willing to offer you that top end of the range. And they see a lot of potential and they see a lot of positives, but also perhaps technically you didn't do well in the interview, or you perhaps didn't show a willingness to be flexible, and that was a concern point. So there's many factors that will dictate what we offer and why we offer the things we do. But likewise, we have the flip side of that, of people sometimes come in and do extremely well and we want to give them all we possibly can, and our managers are usually on board with that, because frankly the managers don't mind what they pay, because it's the cost to the company. It's not going to affect their cost personally. So they always want to do the best they can for their future team, is usually the stance. Well, that's my experience of my hiring managers. They usually want to give their team member coming in as much as possible in terms of possible compensation. But it sometimes is the flip side of they don't do particularly well, and then I kind of have to rein them in and say, but they didn't do well, so why are we offering them that very competitive salary when you have a concern about the level of experience, or the fact we're going to have to upskill and invest from a training perspective? Do we want to kind of hold back and then revisit their salary perhaps at their end of year review point, when we might want to reward them with an increase to their salary because they've worked hard to upskill in the area that they're lacking? So there's all those sorts of conversations that happen in the background and internally when we're getting to the point of offer.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Isabel, there's a couple of more questions. Anastasia, did this kind of answer your questions, or do you want to ask your question?
Yes, for the most part it answered. I just wanted to know the distinction between like bargaining the salary and negotiating it, because you don't want to come off like with the too high target and then keep on going lower and lower, and then you end up in like way lower than what you expected. How to like find balance in between? Thank you, Isabel.
So Anastasia, that comes back to being transparent from the very start of your interview process. Because if you tell people what you want and need from the offset, that should never happen. They should never come in much below your expectation. Companies aren't in the habit of lowballing on salaries, frankly, because it's a very costly process from a time and resource perspective to hire. So when we are offering salary, we want to be competitive. So it wouldn't be likely that you'll be presented with an offer that doesn't align to your initial expectations. I think that just comes back to the point about being very transparent at the start of the process and being realistic. So for instance, don't give a range that is actually not in line with what you can afford to take in terms of salary. So just be careful about those initial conversations and don't give too much of a broad range. For instance, if your ideal salary is $80,000, you might be able to flex, you know, 5,000 up and down on that figure to give a range that equates to that. But try and keep your target figure in the middle of the range that you provide if you feel much more comfortable giving a range, because then you'll never be presented with something that is way outside of expectation, if that makes sense.
Yes, thank you.
You're very welcome.
Brian?
Yes. Thank you for sharing, Isabel. This has been super helpful so far. My question is around, would you have any advice on how to approach the discussion of internally asking for a raise within a large company with very structured promotions and salary ranges? And the reason I ask is because I'm just kind of anticipating the counter objection of there being a fixed process, and you can't really circumvent that. So I'd be curious to hear your advice on that.
Yeah, so this is something that I get asked quite a lot, just from being a recruiter within the business. People tend to want my advice when they come to having these conversations. And the best piece of advice I ever gave to someone is, what have you done to earn that promotion? Because if you can go with a business case to your manager, to your HR team, that I have exceeded expectations in my role, and therefore, or I am performing the expectations of the role that I'm aspiring to, and you have evidence of that, that's much more compelling than saying, I think I deserve this, and not being able to back it up. So I had a recent circumstance at the start of last year where actually a friend asked me this question. She doesn't work for us. She works for a very large financial services brand who I'm very familiar with because they're quite a big employer local to where I live. And she came to me and said, look, I am in this role. I am performing the job criteria of this role. These are the things I've done. They won't give me a promotion. What do I do? And I advised that, okay, bring it up to one-to-one with your manager, because that's the first protocol. You need to discuss it with your manager. If your manager is presented with a valid business case, that should prompt them to go and have a conversation with either their superiors, or, if it's more relevant, the HR person, to say this person is performing all these things that we require of a more senior role. What can we do to provide them with some compensation or support in making that transition happen? So it should prompt it, but always try and go in with some fact figures and actual evidence of the work that's being done, which validates the promotion. Don't just go in hot and say, I think I need this. And she was then earmarked for, so my friend was earmarked for promotion mid-year on the basis that they then pinned her up to transition into the role over a 6-month period. And then she was rewarded. I know it's not ideal for some people, they want things now. But 6 months, frankly, as opposed to going on job search, if you're happy with your company, is sometimes a little bit better. So just try and think about what you can do to help your business understand the value you're adding, and how you can actually steer that conversation, and try and come in with a case already in place of, these are the things I'm doing, which are the role responsibilities of the role I am aspiring to. That is why I think I am now growing towards that, or I'm actually performing that role. What are you going to do in order to support me reaching that goal?
Isabel, thank you so much. But just to consider the time that we have left, let's finish your presentation, and then hopefully, if we have time, we don't want to keep you for too long. We will address all questions at the end as well. I also want the role play to happen because I'm excited about that.
So how to navigate a counter offer. So there's just a few things to consider here. We've actually touched on a few just in these conversations around questions. But just kind of pointers, if you have multiple offers, or perhaps you're internal with the company right now and you're considering moving to a different company due to perhaps lack of compensation, or you're not getting promotion, as Brian just mentioned, you might be aiming towards promotion, it's not happening in the time frames that you're anticipating. Just be conscious of a few things. So first of all, be transparent with your HR/recruitment partner about anything that is ongoing, i.e. if you have final stage other interviews elsewhere and they've just presented you an offer, let them know, because you might want to see those processes through. As long as it's within the realms of possibility, i.e. you're going to be doing that within the next week or so, as opposed to the next couple of months, most people will be open to it and be fine with it, and we're able to accommodate that. Be realistic about the timescales. So this is the question that I had recently from an individual who we were interviewing. We presented him with an offer, and I said, how soon would you be able to respond? Can I call you back in 48 to 72 hours to discuss it further? And he responded by saying, actually, I've got a final interview, but it's in 3 weeks' time because the team are on holiday, which was a bit of a difficult situation because we really like the candidate, but 3 weeks is quite a long time to wait, as well as having other possible options in the pipeline for the role. So I had to go back to the team and suggest that's something they were comfortable with. So also be aware that if your recruiter can't give you an answer right away, they might have to talk to the team and follow up with you. And then if you're struggling to reach a decision, feel free to reach out to your recruiter. If you have multiple offers, but perhaps there are pros and cons to each, it might be worth speaking to the team again or speaking to your recruiter, chatting those things through, asking questions, maybe perhaps talking to your line manager about what in reality you'll be doing in role to give you a better sense of expectation for the first kind of 30 to 90 days might help you in making that decision. And often we're happy to do that. We want you to have those conversations. We want you to have an informed decision when making that choice. So feel free to ask for that. But just be conscious that you need to think about what's most important to you. So i.e., is salary, progression, or the bonus scheme available the most important thing to you personally, and how that weigh into your decision when considering multiple offers. So useful resources, just to list a few. I'm going to skim through these very quickly. So utilise your GCD advisor at Bentley. They are obviously there to support you, help you, and are a wealth of knowledge and resource. So please touch base with them if you are considering an offer or multiple offers and need some advice in navigating that. Also, you can refer to your programme director. There's also some public resources that we've already touched on to a degree. Things like Glassdoor, Vault.com, Salary.com are all really useful when considering whether the offer is competitive and aligned to the company standard. LinkedIn, obviously, you can join groups on LinkedIn that support topics around salary negotiation, and there's some really helpful tips and tricks that people share, and people also share their own story and their own experience to give you a sense of what to expect. There's one recommendation here that I really value, and that is your alumni network. I don't have an alumni network, they don't exist here in the UK, but I spoke to a number of amazing candidates in the US, especially at kind of the grad, intern / CULT level, who utilise their alumni network when they're considering offers, and they gave me some really good examples of advice they had received via the alumni network, which makes me think it's a really good resource that you can lean on. There's one here about local staffing agencies. Be very careful when talking to recruiting agencies. They are sometimes very helpful, but be careful about the ones at which you approach. I would only reach out to a staffing agency if there's someone close to you has recommended them as a good resource. Obviously, they all have very different perspectives. There's lots of them in market. They can also be a little bit confusing in terms of their knowledge in market, depending upon how frequently they work with the industry that's applicable to your offer. So just be careful there. And then use your network, use your friends, use your family, use your peers. They're all really good resources. Just be conscious that, again, people around you will have very individual and unique situations that they're working to. So although it's great to chat to them and get some advice and kind of bounce ideas off them, be aware that each of you are unique and have a unique skill set and background, which means that your personal experience will vary depending upon each person. And then navigating right to work questions. This is super important and is something that comes up a lot on a day-to-day basis. So if you are applying to a role that you are not a citizen of the country in which the role resides, or perhaps you're exploring your options more internationally, just be aware that you're going to be asked about your right to work, your authorization to work. And the way in which we usually phrase it as a recruiter is, are you authorized to work in this country? The answer is usually yes, even if you're an international student studying in the country and perhaps don't have citizenship there. You'll often have things like the OPT, which will give you right to work. But then there is always a follow-up question to that of whether this right to work has an end date attached to it. For example, if you have a visa or OPT with an expiry date attached to it, we will then have to sponsor beyond that. And the way in which we phrase that normally is, will you require sponsorship now or in the future? If the answer is yes, like it will be if you have an OPT, because OPT has a limited time attached to it, you will require sponsorship and you need to make your recruiter aware of that. Some roles you will be able to sponsor as a recruiter, i.e. there's usually a skills matrix that we're working to. So roles that are classified as highly skilled, for instance, usually companies can sponsor for, but there is an independent intercompany and then also a local government, usually criteria that we're working to, and we usually have to refer to our immigration specialists internally. So don't be surprised if you do require sponsorship. Your recruiter might say, actually, unfortunately, we can't sponsor for this role because it doesn't meet our criteria. Or they might even say, I need to confirm with our immigration specialist if we're able to sponsor for this role, and they might have to take that away as an action item on their part. So don't be surprised if those conversations do come up quite quickly. It's something we usually want to get an understanding of in that initial stage. So if we do need to support it, then we can ensure that we follow the right channels in order to do so. Again, if you have any doubts or questions, please reach out to CISS, so Centre of International Students and Scholars at Bentley. They'll be able to provide more information around that and what that looks like. I'm going to stop sharing because I'm going to call upon Jen, if she's ready, to just go through a couple of scenarios with you. So we are going to provide two scenarios. We're going to provide a negative salary negotiation and then talk a little bit about why it was negative, and then a positive salary negotiation. I am going to refer, Jen and I have done this once, so please excuse us. We're trying to just give you the best insight into what it will look like in reality. I am going to refer to my notes, but thank you to Jen for helping me out with this. So the first scenario, we are going to be extending an offer to Jen as the candidate in this instance for a business analyst role. Chose business analyst because it's a very standard job title. It can vary hugely depending on industry, years of experience, and it can apply to different levels of experience in terms of where you might be sitting in your career. It's quite an open-ended role, and I thought it would be a good example. Jen, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Lovely. Okay. So first of all, I always open the conversation by just calling the candidate and asking if it's a good time to talk. So I'm going to pretend that I'm phoning Jen and I'm sending her this offer. So, hi Jen, it's Isabel calling from TripAdvisor. I'm just calling with regards to your recent interviews regarding the business analyst role. Is this a good time to talk?
Hi, Isabel. Thanks for calling. Now's a great time.
Lovely. Jen, thank you so much for taking the time to meet with the team recently. They all really enjoyed meeting with you. And I have some great news. They would very much like to extend you an offer for the role of business analyst, starting on a date to be decided based on your mutual convenience. And the details of that offer are as follows. We would very much like to extend you the base salary of $80,000 with 10% bonus potential and $8,000 worth of RSUs, which is the monetary equivalent of stock, which will vest over a 4-year period at 25% each year.
Is there any movement on the salary? Because it's a little lower than what I expected.
Okay, Jen, can I ask what you'd be looking for in terms of your target figure?
Honestly, I was looking for something upwards of $100,000.
Okay, Jen, I'm a little surprised. There's obviously when we talked initially, the $80,000 was within the range that you gave me. Unfortunately, $100,000 is far above what we are able to offer for this role. Is there any way in which you might consider taking a lower salary with the basis that this role has a really strong progression attached to it, i.e. coming in as a business analyst within the first 12 to 18 months, we would expect you to progress to senior based upon this experience and academic qualifications you already have?
No, I actually can't consider a lesser offer. I really do believe that my expectations are in line with what the market's offering.
Okay, Jen, I really appreciate your transparency, but if unfortunately you're not able to negotiate on that figure at all and come down from it, unfortunately I am going to have to rescind the offer as we just can't stretch to that amount. It's unfortunately far above what we have benchmarked for this role. Even considering if we were able to offer you a spot bonus, we still won't be able to meet you at that 100,000 mark, unfortunately. Really appreciate your time. I really do wish you the very best in your continued search.
Thank you.
So in that instance, obviously Jen is asking for far above what the role was asking. And in this scenario, it is also outside of the range that we initially discussed. You would be surprised how frequently I am informed this happens. It's always a shock when a candidate comes back with a response to an offer that is outside of any previous discussions. It hasn't happened to me personally for many, many years. Thankfully, it doesn't happen that frequently, but that goes back to my point about being clear from the offset about what you expect, i.e. what you need from a role in terms of your personal circumstance and how that might relate to a future offer in those initial conversations with your recruiter. So Jen, if we could move on to the second scenario, I'd really appreciate that. So the second scenario is much more positive and open conversation, and the role is a talent coordinator. It's a pretty broad job title again. If you look at a lot of companies in the local area, they will recruit for similar types of roles. So I would do exactly the same in this instance. So I would call Jen and ask if this is a good time. So hi Jen, just calling from TripAdvisor, it's Isabel here. Really keen to talk a little bit more about your recent interviews for the talent coordinator role. Is this a good time to speak with you, please?
Hi Isabel, thanks for calling. Now's a great time.
Amazing. Jen, first of all, thanks so much for taking the time to meet with the team. They really enjoyed the conversations had with you and learning a little bit more about your skills and experience. I have some great news. They would very much like to extend you an offer, and the details of that offer are as follows. The base salary is $70,000 with a bonus potential of 10%, and a 6,500 RSU package, which is the monetary equivalent of the stock price, and that would vest over 4 years at 25% for each year in service.
Thank you so much for the offer. I am really excited about the prospect of working for TripAdvisor. I do have one question, however. I was wondering if there's any possible movement in the salary, as it's a little lower than what I was expecting.
Jen, I can absolutely discuss that with the team. Can I ask if you have a target figure in mind for that, please?
Yeah, I was looking for something around 74,000, just because I was looking for a small advancement on my current salary.
Okay, Jen, can I take that away and discuss with the team and then give you a call back? Is that all right?
Absolutely, that sounds great. Thank you.
Brilliant. Leave it with me. I will call you back very shortly. So I would take that away and then discuss terms with the team. As you saw in Jen's response to the offer, she is asking for something that is an advancement on the offer provided, but it's not a huge stretch. It's within 10% of what we've offered her. And she's given a justification. She's given me the insight and she's looking for an advancement on her current salary, which is, you know, something that we also appreciate the context as to why they're looking for an increase on the offer. So in this instance, I would take that away, discuss with the team and come back to Jen once I have had a conversation about what's possible. So I would call Jen back. Hi, Jen, it's Isabel calling again. Are you okay to speak right now?
Hi, Isabel. Yes, absolutely.
Brilliant. Jen, I have spoken to the team and I've had a discussion around your expectations and why you'd be looking to negotiate on that figure. They have come back and asked that I re-extend the offer at 73,500. In terms of this new offer, this figure is in line with our existing team still, so it's not bringing you in above our existing individuals within that role. Yes, I'm hoping it's enough to ensure that you understand that we're very keen to have you on board and the team really would like to stretch their budget in order to bring you on and hopefully secure you in the role.
Thank you. I really appreciate the offer. I must ask though, do you mind if I ask if that's the most the team can offer?
It is in this instance, unfortunately, Jan, we have to take into consideration what we're paying our existing team members. And as I'm sure you'll appreciate, we don't want to be bringing someone in from an external source who is being paid much more than the existing team. So it's factoring in all aspects, and this is really the best they can do on this occasion.
I understand. Thank you for explaining. Is there any way you can send me the details in writing so I can think it over?
Of course, I will send you all details with the full benefit summary attached so you can consider all factors. Is it okay if I could call you back in 48 hours to talk more about the total offer?
That sounds great. Thank you.
Brilliant, Jen. I look forward to speaking to them. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye. So As per conversation with Jen, that was a much more open conversation because there was a back and forth. It was open about why Jen was looking for more on the offer. Like I said, it wasn't a huge stretch from the actual figure. Usually there is a rationale. We always have a rationale as to why we're offering the figure we are. In this instance, the scenario was we didn't want to be bringing Jen in above existing team members, which is a large part of usually the way in which we assess the salaries. So hopefully that gives you an understanding of how to have the conversation with your recruiter and what that might look like. We have a few minutes left, so I am going to open it back up to questions. I know there are a few chat notifications, so that is great. We'll get to hopefully all your questions. If for any reason we do not get to a question you have today, as I mentioned, you can reach me on LinkedIn or via my email. That is also fine, but I'll turn it over to questions at this stage.
There was one very quick question from someone who asked if an internship offer is negotiable.
Yes, usually it is. Interns, again, we usually pay a little bit different for interns. So interns typically would be paid on an hourly rate, but there's usually flex on that. So just be mindful as to how an internship offer is presented. It will be different. It's usually on an hourly basis, or they'll give you a rate per week or a rate per month enroll, as opposed to an annual figure. So it's going to be a different structure when you're provided with that offer. But usually it is negotiable. And, you know, again, you would have a conversation about your expectations at the very start of the process to ensure that company is able to offer something in line with that.
Great. Any more questions? We have a comment from Chris Walker who said this is very helpful.
Brilliant. I'm glad it's been helpful. I really appreciate having the opportunity to come back. If anyone has any other questions, I invite you to come off mute and just ask them. I'm absolutely happy to answer any follow-up questions people might have. Give people another second.
Isabel, this is Audra again.
Of course. Hi, Audra.
I always have questions. And I hope you don't mind. This one actually has to do with one of your last slides that I know we had to go quickly through. So in terms of international students and when they actually share that they need sponsorship and that conversation there, can you shed some light or further light?
Yeah, of course. So first of all, in terms of that aspect, like I said, it's usually a case of we either can sponsor because the role is a skilled role and is okay for sponsorship, or we cannot. And it also depends upon the hiring team. So there is a cost attached to sponsorship, depending upon the country, and in certain instances in the US, the state, depends upon the amount of cost that is attached to that. So obviously it has to be financially viable for us to sponsor, i.e. if we are hiring for an administrative role that's very junior, or it's not requiring any existing experience, we're not likely to provide any sponsorship for that, because there'll be a large range of candidates who should be able to apply in the local area without sponsorship, and obviously that hasn't got a cost attached to it. But if you are someone who has a specific skill set, i.e. you are applying to a role that requires a specific degree, or it requires specific years in experience in a particular role, those are the types of roles that are more likely to have sponsorship requirements attached to them, and we usually are able to discuss that and talk to the hiring team and the immigration specialists internally around what that looks like. The one thing I would say is companies also usually have a quota for the year that we are trying to work to, i.e. we might have a budget attached to sponsorship for the year. Sometimes it is a case we get close to the end of the year and we've used our budget, and we don't mind telling you that. Sometimes it's a case of there just is no budget, or we have to go and confirm with the team if they're happy to take that cost on as part of additional unplanned for budget. So there's a whole lot of stuff that happens in the background. So just be mindful. The recruiter will usually be very transparent from the offset. We can either sponsor or we can't, and they might provide some rationale. I spoke to a candidate about a month ago for a role that wasn't providing sponsorship purely because it is a fairly junior role and it's quite a common role, and we don't need to sponsor for the role because frankly there are a number of candidates who don't need sponsorship, and we had over 200 applications. And I explained that to the candidate. I said, look, this is the situation. I'm not in a position to sponsor for this role right now. If things change, I might circle back to you. Is that okay? And I was very open and honest about it. I set their expectations that why the rationale is around us not being able to sponsor. They understood it, and they actually appreciated me just sharing that context of this is the situation and this is why we won't be exploring sponsorship for this role. And they shared, oh, I don't get that information. I've been trying to find a role in the local area for X amount of months. No one's explained to me what the requirements are for around sponsorship. And he just appreciated me taking that 5 minutes to talk about what that looks like and what companies factor in when thinking about sponsorship. So there's a few things that happen in the background. If you ask a recruiter, they're usually happy to share it. But sometimes it is just good to ask that follow-up of, why is this role not being sponsored for? Or would there be any circumstance in which you're able to sponsor for this role?
Thank you, Isabel. Doesn't look like there's any more questions. And Isabel is gracefully sharing her PowerPoint with us. So people who attended this will receive a copy of it. And also, as Audra mentioned, the recording of this will be on our YouTube channel, and you can watch the whole thing again. I agree, this was enormously helpful when it comes to salary negotiations. And as Audra mentioned, we are all here as a part of the graduate career development team to help you all because it can be tricky to negotiate an offer, and we don't want you to do the wrong thing. So we'll be happy to help you in the process every step of the way. Isabel, thank you so much once more. This has been great both times, and we appreciate your collaboration with us, and TripAdvisor has been an awesome partner with Bentley. And hopefully we'll do this again next year, right?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jen, for helping out on the role play. Just putting my legal hat on, the figures provided against the roles, I made them up. They have no actual material attachment to them, just as a kind of disclaimer. I just picked a figure out of midair. I have no idea what those roles would pay in the US, so they're not realistic if you're thinking about applying to similar roles at TripAdvisor.
Yeah, got it. Thank you, and thank you, Audra, for helping me through this. And we'll hopefully be in touch, Isabel, soon, okay?
Sounds great. And I will
thank you so much all for joining, and I see some of you in my class in about 5 minutes.
Isabel, I have a quick question for you, so if you can hang on for a second.
No worries at all.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
I'm actually texting you in the chat.
Audra, will you
turn
off the recording when you're done?
Yes, okay. Absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'll be in touch with you, Isabel, and Audra, I'll see you this afternoon.
Yes.
I have to wear my professor hat now, as they call me.
Have a lovely time. I'll speak to you soon.
Okay, lovely to see you again.
You
Bye.
too. Bye.
Bye, everyone.